I just wanted to hear that intro for a second, dude. It's just like super funky. Yeah.
Your voice is back to normal.
Flangered. That's actually a wah, not a flanger. Anyway, welcome to another episode of Faith and Whatever, the dankest podcast that ever existed. We are currently bringing you episode number 27? 27, wow. Where we are doing all things big time. My name is Josh_Carmen. You can find me on the Twitters. You can find Jose Castaneda at twitch.tv /
Bumfoot.
BUMMFOOT. That's like buttfoot, but bumfoot. Jamothy is at Twitter on JamesYuile. Chris is at Marion Ranch. And Garrett List today, he is at T Student Life. He's doing homework and recovering from vacation. Isn't it always weird how you always feel like you need an extra day or two to recover after your vacation?
Kind of defeats the purpose of vacation.
Yeah, it totally makes me feel bad for not feeling bad about that. So for the religious segment, that's what we're doing. That's who we are. We've been getting some pretty positive feedback. Some of our stuff is starting to go viral, as it were. And by viral, I mean like fives of clicks. It's been pretty cool. So we are joined by a special guest, Jose, today. Jose, why don't you tell the peoples a little bit about yourself, kind of who you are, what have you done, and why do
you look down upon them?
And how the heck do you end up here, my friend?
I ended up here because James invited me earlier to do a game club podcast, so that's pretty fun. What else did you want me to say?
Just tell us about you. Who's Jose for the viewer who may not know who you are?
All right.
Other than probably one of our most avid contributors and rabid fans.
As you can tell, I have bad memory. I am also a student. Well, I was a student at HIU. That's where I met both of these guys. And
don't know what that is. We'll bleep that out.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding.
And then after that, I'm currently in school, about to start my student teaching this upcoming fall. So I'm looking pretty excited for that. And yeah, that's who I am, I guess.
Very
at the
good.
Moment.
Very good.
Aside from my wife and daughter that, are part of my life as well.
Probably big roles in there.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting. We're pretty excited to have Jose on. Jose is also a U.S. veteran, if I may go ahead and just casually insert that into the conversation.
Yeah.
Today, for our religious topic, we are discussing divorce and kind of what that looks like. We wanted to talk about this as. I just think it's an important topic that we need to cover there. We needed to do it eventually, and we figured today was as good of a day as any to make that conversation happen. So we will be kind of discussing what divorce is, what it was historically, what it has been understood and often interpreted as in today's church, how we've kind of handled it, which I think is a little bit poorly in some instances, and I don't know, kind of what the future and the hope of marriage might look like in the future for the millennial generation, as we hopefully will undo some of the damage that's been done there. So as we jump into it, we will just pose this overarching question. How do we think divorce has been handled in the church? And then we'll move. Actually, let's not start there. That'll be our application side. Let's quickly discuss. James, why don't you give us a little bit of insight into what divorce has been historically, and we'll go on from there.
What it's been historically? I'm not sure.
Scripturally, historically.
Okay. So, I mean, I'm not sure if it's much more than what you think it is. Obviously, on the one hand, there's a few small distinctions, but so with marriage was mostly, if you can't just talk about history as if it's unified, but if we're talking about biblical history, maybe ancient Near Eastern history, right, Palestinian, Israelite, regions of the world, thousands of years ago, that marriage was often involved the family as well, right? It wasn't just a contract between a man and woman. It was a contract between a man and his family, a woman and her family. And often there's some economical trades in that. I'm a little unclear about exactly how ancient Jewish, what the trade there was, but there was economical trades. Generally, there was some purchasing going on back and forth, some trading.
Would that be the dowry? Is that correct?
Well, dowry is more of a modern English term, but yeah, things like that. And so, and marriage, I might get some of this a little mixed up, but my understanding was that so the marriage ceremony, what we'd consider the ceremony, would happen for many days, but a couple would be considered generally. There was like a betrothal period, so all the contractual matters had happened, and for about a year there would be kind of a moonlighting situation, almost what we would consider dating, where the woman would usually consider to live with her family, continue to live with her family, but there was some kind of getting to know each other period.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't fully married. The marriage wasn't fully complete until they, about a year later, signed the contract by getting in bed and having sex for the first time. That's my understanding of how a marriage went in this case. And during, even though they weren't fully married, they were certainly kind of in a weird twilight of marriage before they got in bed together. And
like our modern engagement period almost.
Right, and they could cut that contract for almost any reason during that time. He could decide, she couldn't, in this culture, he could decide that this wasn't going to work out. And also in terms of divorce, when we're talking about the day of Jesus, and I'm not saying this is the way Jesus would have it, I'm saying this is the way the culture was, period, with or without Jesus, that the lady did not have the right to divorce, that it was a man's thing, right? So a man decided that for whatever reason he did not want to be married to this woman anymore, and he could write her a certificate to sort of release her from marriage and usually send her back home to her next of kin.
Mm-hmm. Send her right back on her way.
Right. And also, if you know anything about women in the first century and before Semitic world, that they didn't have a lot of legal rights, right? A woman couldn't sign a contract. A woman couldn't represent herself in court. A woman couldn't make large purchases to own property because basically she didn't have a legal voice. She needed a male kin to represent her. So if she wanted to go to court, male kin had to go to court for her. If she wanted to do whatever, male kin had to do it for her, which meant women were in an incredibly sensitive social situation in the ancient world. And for a man to divorce a woman was really to put her in a potentially dangerous social ambiguity, because if she didn't have a male heir a male kin who would take her in, and she was going to be rejected by her husband, then she basically lost any way to protect herself legally. She couldn't, if another man harmed her, she couldn't get restitution because she can't represent herself in the court system. If she wanted to own a home, even if she could afford it, she couldn't buy it without a man representing her. If anything that had to do with the legal economic systems of the day, she really couldn't do. So to divorce a woman is quite a it's quite a thing. It's quite, if she doesn't have a strong male kin to take her in, and that situation isn't sort of taken care of.
We're talking about legitimate life danger.
Right,
for this
life
woman.
danger. It's basically putting somebody on the streets.
Yeah. So, okay, so now that we kind of have a little bit of that background information, let's quickly state, we wanted Jose to be a part of this because we like the idea of having more people who are also married, have children, that are just not us, new perspectives, new understandings, different thoughts to bring to the table.
He's been divorced like 7 times.
No,
I haven't.
So let's, just in case anybody didn't get that as a joke. Quickly, we'll talk about what divorce looked like as far as Scripture is concerned, right? We have this understanding of 2 basic schools of thoughts, right? 2 rabbinic schools of thoughts who were... Do you remember them off the top of your head?
I mean, one of them is...
Shammai and Hillel. Does that sound about right?
I was going to say Hillel. Shammai is the one I wasn't thinking of.
So Shammai is considered like the conservative thought, the conservative voice that says you have to give a woman her certificate, and you can only divorce her if she's committed like adultery or like basically a very egregious sin.
The Shammai school would read the scriptures as literally as they thought they could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Hillel, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
He was pretty liberal, like basically any reason you want to. If she burned your cooking, didn't look nice anymore, whatever it was, you could
Much
give
more
her,
spirit of the law.
you could give her a a certificate, and let her on her way.
Hillel was one of the most prominent first century Jewish teachers, and in fact, the Apostle Paul, the book of Acts says that the Apostle Paul studied under Gamaliel. That was either Hillel's son or grandson, depending on what historical witness we go with. So that's just a connection to the New Testament there. Hillel is the either father or grandfather of Gamaliel, the trainer, the person who taught Paul how to think.
Yeah, so a very very big deal, and that could be partly why Paul was so liberal in a lot of his interpretive understandings of Scripture. So let's quickly talk about just the two passages that we see divorce appear, particularly in the Gospels, as they have to do with Jesus specifically. One of them is Mark 10. The other is Matthew, Matthew 19, Chris? Yep. And with these ideas, in Mark 10, you see Jesus giving no permissive reason for people to give a divorce.
It's quite strict.
Yeah, he just doesn't say anything other than the fact that anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another man, she commits adultery. That is Mark 10, 11, and 12. And then in Matthew 19, we see the permission granted if she's committed adultery, right? Jesus says, let's see, in verse 9, I tell you, anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another woman commits adultery. So we see a caveat that we have in Matthew that we don't see in Mark.
Yeah, before you continue your thought, please recognize that Jesus is speaking to men here, right? He doesn't say your spouse. He says, unless she is adulterous, then you can divorce her, right? His audience here is men. He's speaking to the reality of his day, which is divorce was in the hands of the man, right? So
yeah,
continue on.
And so, but a perfect idea, because now Jesus, the context of this understanding is Jesus is talking with the Pharisees, and there's looking for some understanding of how to trap them, and Jesus gives this big, really like weighty requirement for marriage, like this really heavy reality, so much so that the disciples look at him and say, well, man, like,
should anybody marry?
Yeah, how do we even live up to that? And I think Jesus' response to that is like one that's like not saying, well, no, you misunderstood me, or no, you kind of missed some stuff here. It's like, no, you're exactly right. Like, marriage is that serious. Marriage is that big of a deal. We need to treat it as such. And we have definitely just done I think a poor job, right? As just a society in general, in terms of honoring that. But I just want to get your guys' thoughts. And Jose, we'll start with you. What are your thoughts on these passages? What are your thoughts in terms of like application of them? Just as far as, strictly Jose's opinion there, if you don't mind kind of giving that, knowing the weightiness of this, maybe to make it a little bit more helpful of a question. How has this biblical command from Jesus played in your mind in terms of how you have decided to go about being a husband, a father, etc.?
Oh, man. I think it's, at least for me, it's kind of difficult because I don't see one side or the other kind of being in charge of the marriage, right?
Sure,
I see it more of a
egalitarian.
Both of us working together on it. So for me to kind of see, like, listen and see that, Jesus was talking about, like, in case your wife was being adulterous, then you can divorce her, right? I think that for me, that would be kind of what not against, but it kind of goes against what I'm kind of, my view on marriage, right?
Okay.
We're both kind of in it together.
Okay.
So if something happens like that, I would want to be like, okay, what happened? Where did we go wrong? How can we fix that? And if we can't, then, maybe is this the best option to go with a divorce or whatever? At least that's what I think that I would want to do. Whether I do that or not, I mean, I don't know, right? I haven't been there, so. Yeah,
and I want to get just the reality of, like, having a child with somebody really intensifies. So, it'll obviously won't happen, but for my wife and I, if we were to get a divorce, it would be a lot cleaner of a separation than for either of you guys who don't have, or as we don't have any children. Is it even possible to quantify the type of, I guess, either damage or, kind of discussionary fodder, or that kind of comes up with having children? I mean, I know it alters things, but is there like a way to put a number on how much it alters things in terms of like, the likelihood of you getting a divorce?
I think children make marriage tougher, especially for the first couple of years. I mean, what makes divorces crumble, right? Whatever is the visible thing that we can blame, like let's say it's adultery, or let's say it's
children,
some sort of abuse. Usually, what's underlying that thing, causing that thing, is stressors in the marriage, and children are a huge stressor. And I have 2 children. I don't say this lightly. There's stressors in the marriage. Something I want to add to sort of color this conversation is that a big part of the problem with divorce in American Christianity, at least, is something I've been thinking about lately, is that as a faith, we're far less likely right now in this time for Christianity, in this culture, to sort of get involved in the household, right? Preachers will say anything they want from the pulpit. You'll hear preachers say a lot of things about character and treatment of people from the pulpit, but what they won't do is enter into the household and demand a father to be a good father, a mother to be a good mother, for children to honor their parents. So we've kind of put a separation between the pastors and the spiritual leaders and the household itself. We feel like we can't step into that context and say anything with authority. But honestly, that's not what historical Christianity is. And I've had the pleasure of kind of seeing a more discipleship focused church as of late, and how they work with people very directly, calling fathers to be good fathers, calling people to be good employees, calling mothers to be good mothers, children to be good children, to call people to act in Christ in the household, in their employment, everywhere. And I think the problem of divorce in the church, it wouldn't be 100% solved, but it'd be far more depleted if we did the tougher job well before divorce was a problem, with kind of engaging into the character of the household.
Yeah.
And I do see, like, I think we talked about what can Christians learn from blank. Remember that topic?
Yeah.
And I said they could learn from Mormons this idea of the bishop or the spiritual leaders of the Mormon church sort of directly engaging, in this particular case, fathers, but it could just be parents, to make sure that they are being good fathers. Well, I think our spiritual leaders, we need to do a better job of engaging people directly in that manner, making sure that character and Christian living isn't just something we say broadly speaking from the pulpit, but something we bring directly into the life of each individual in our church. Mm-hmm. And that we take, it used to be that, the pastor was driving around all week, visiting all these families in their homes, making sure that things were going okay. Not just to judge them or to moralize them, but also to see if they had any needs that others could take care of, to see if there's anything the pastor could do, to see if there's other families could do for this family he's visiting. Mm-hmm. And we've just stopped doing that, right? We don't engage. Pastors aren't engaging the household, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, the more individualized we've become through technology and investments, what have you, the more private we've become.
Right.
Kind of with our own lives with that. So, Chris, you waited a little bit longer to get married, right? What would you think was advantageous about that for you in your specific case?
Well, I always took marriage very seriously, which kind of ties in with what you were saying earlier. And so I wanted to wait until I was very sure.
Mm-hmm.
And to, just it wasn't something I took lightly at all. And I wasn't going to let it be something I just jumped into or whatever.
And so there was a willingness and a patience, I guess, there that it doesn't seem to be found as often anymore.
Yeah, and a lot of people are just in love with the idea of getting married.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And they want to have the big party and they want all the attention.
Yeah, because, you do have to put in a lot of work in a marriage, right, for it to work.
Yeah.
I don't know how it is for everybody else, right? But at least for my wife and I, it's been kind of a struggle, especially with me coming back from a military background, right? Like, I was in the military. I had different kind of ideas and stuff. And then I came back and I kind of struggled kind of incorporating myself back into civilian life. And fortunately, she was right there and she was able to kind of support me and help me out through that struggle. Now, it kind of speaks really highly of her, in my opinion, because, she could have been another person that would have thrown in the towel and then just kind of left me there, right? But she kind of stuck it with me, and she kind of showed me like, hey, if you want a marriage to work out, you do have to put in that work on both sides, right? Not just one person. So it's not always going to be, really rosy, but you got to put in that effort and work into it. And I think if you go into a marriage thinking like that, I think you'll be pretty successful with it. At least that's my opinion. So.
Yeah, and I think you hit on something very, very specific here that I want to, as we kind of circle around home and kind of talk about the application side of why we're even having this conversation. When marriage takes work, we understand that the only permissible reason that we see in Scripture, is the idea of adultery. And I think, again, if somebody's abusing you, if things like that, I think there are very legitimate reasons to leave somebody. Domestic abuse is definitely a big one, verbal abuse, whatever it is, neglect. I think those are serious issues that need to be worked out, and sometimes all you can do is leave. And I think God understands that. I don't think God's like, hey, that guy's beating you half to death. Like, you shouldn't
obviously
go there.
God's ideal is already out the window.
Yeah.
So now that God's ideal is already out the window, what's the best thing to do next?
Yeah, and so there is certainly a theology of accommodation that's on display in these chapters. And so, but the thing that I was hoping to kind of bring around this discussion to is this idea of like, what is it that you think has been, the secret to your guys' longer marriage, right? Chris and I have been married a few years. I'm certainly the shortest amount of time in here. Just in like 2 or 3 minutes apiece, do you think there are a few tips that you could give on how to prevent divorce from happening, just in your personal experience, things that you've learned throughout the years, is for somebody who might be watching and kind of in a difficult spot with their marriage, or even a single person who's watching and considering like, what they should take into the idea of marriage with them?
I think some of the best advice is the advice you've heard already, but I think people don't actually, they say they do it, but they don't actually do it, such as having true open communication with your spouse. I think that makes all the difference. I think we can all talk to our spouses about a lot of things, but I think there tends to be some dark corners that we don't want to open up. And I think the sort of the suspicion that results from having that few things you don't want to talk about, those few things you want to keep for yourself, I think that causes tension, and tensions over time create turmoil, and turmoil threatens to be divorce. Having 100% open communication about everything and being able to do it without shame, I think will solve a lot of that. Also, it takes patience. When you marry somebody, you're I'm not saying you need to completely acquiesce to that person's will, but you need to definitely acquiesce to each other. You have to do your half. Your spouse has to do that person's half. And there has to be an acquiescing where you have to take 2 lives and create 1 life out of it. And that means sacrifice. Sacrifice of things that aren't necessarily bad. They're good things. But you can't fit 200% into 100% of life, right? A whole 100% between the two of you has to get cut. Also, don't ever marry thinking you're going to change somebody to fit into your life. If you and your significant other, if you have plans to go do, let's say, graduate school in another state, and the person you're with right now, you're dating, is a homebody, well, there's a clash of wills there, and it's one of you has to sacrifice that, and that ought to be figured out before you get married.
Very good.
And there's a lot of other ways that they clash. So that's some thoughts there. Also, I lost my thought, so I'll hand it over to Jose.
Okay. Well, I guess if somebody were to come up and ask me that question.
Also, how long have you been married?
It'll be 9 years this year.
9 years. So 9 years and 10 years.
10 years.
If someone were to come up and talk to me and ask me that question, right? I think the advice that I would give would be like, hey, what made you fall in love with your spouse, right? And kind of try and find a connection back to that. Sometimes you can kind of drift away. At least I found out for me, you can kind of drift away from that. So kind of reminding yourself like, hey, what made this person special in my life, right? And then kind of reconnecting with that and kind of rekindling that, you know. I mean, I'm not saying that it's going to be like this for everybody, right? But kind of remembering that, hey, there's this thing about her that I loved, and I want to, you know, bring that back out and, you know, kind of connect with that again. And I think it kind of also, another thing that I would say would be do more positives than negatives, right? Try and do more positive things and less negative things for your spouse, because then, you know, it would kind of outweigh, you know, she'll probably remember more positive things than negative things,
Good.
right? So I think that would be a good thing. But like James was saying, you know, like, you know, going into it, being prepared for your marriage and understanding that, you know, you got to communicate with each other and be open about it. You know, I mean, you guys are in it together. You're no longer alone. You know, you got to have support. You got to be able to talk things through and kind of support each other through it. So,
Yeah. I also want to give some advice to the pastors out there, from one pastor to another. Don't use marriage as a way of putting a Band-Aid over sexual temptation. I think a lot of divorce in the Christian church comes out of marrying too quickly because there was pressure to get married so you wouldn't have sex.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? That is all the wrong reasons to get married, and it's a setup for a bad marriage and an almost inevitable divorce. So why is there so much divorce right now in the Christian church? Well, a lot of it's the ministering, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
It's this trying to solve sexuality with the institution of marriage. Marriage isn't there to just solve matters of sexuality. It's there for a positive, not to negate a negative. So, you know, that's some advice from me, that marriage can't be a Band-Aid. It can't be a Band-Aid to fix a situation. It can't be a Band-Aid to fix a pregnancy, right? Marriage is the option. Marriage should be done when the two people are ready to be married and they want to be married, and they have had, and they're going to go into it with both a clear conscience and having already internalized the purpose of marriage. Anytime marriage is a Band-Aid, it's a recipe for disaster.
Chris, any thoughts from where you're going? All right. And then for me, I think experientially I've found to be super helpful so far. I'll just give one thing, is just really being open, but also the very specific desire to keep stuff in the light with a third party there. For me and my wife and myself, for my wife and me, we go to counseling. We still go to counseling, and we started just as premarital with this guy. You know, we figured, all right, we'll do our 6 sessions and then kind of be on our way. And it was awesome. I mean, we just fell in love with this idea of like, there's just an, you know, more or less objective person that I'm paying to be my friend, but also like a guy who, you know, knows what he's doing and can help out there. And it's just been super nice for me to have somebody be able to tell me like, no, you are a real jerk there, or at other times say, no, you were right there. And so it's been helpful just to hear things, because, you know, my wife and I can say things to each other, they can still be true, but if you hear that same thing from somebody, you know, who's a professional in that field, sometimes that weight just carries the extra weight.
Another thing, husbands and wives, don't go to Facebook to define what you think a good marriage is. People go on Facebook and they only present the best about their marriage.
It's called the highlight reel.
The highlight reel. Everybody around you, every marriage around you is having troubles. It's having challenges. They're having fights. Hopefully they're treating them maturely. But all those friends and family you have, that highlight reel is not reality.
Right.
Facebook is never reality. It's the cliff notes of the best of the best.
Yeah, and that's important as we, you know, kind of march further into the history that is social media. So we hope that helps. We understand divorce is a real thing. It's not going away ever there, but we do want to stress that one of the biggest things that we talk about is the importance of divorce and marriage, and what marriage looks like was God's marriage to Israel, and kind of the abandonment that God suffers throughout the entire Hebrew scriptures of the unfaithful Israel. And that's a good lesson of what not to do, right? A good lesson of how to not be. So,
but it's also a good lesson that, you know, he's still working
and
to
still
connect,
kept
right?
bringing them back.
Right, exactly.
And so there's your moral standard. Be like God. But if you have any
Don't
thoughts
give
or
up.
any
Be
ideas, please feel free. You know, any advice that you can give. Marriage is a great thing. It's probably the best decision I've ever made, hands down.
Probably.
Yeah, and depends on the day. Just kidding. I love you, babe. And so feel free to connect with us on Twitter. I'm at Josh_Carmen. He's at twitch.tv/bum, BUMMFOOT. Jamothy is at James YUILE. Chris is at Marion Ranch. Garrett is at T-Student Life, and you can find us on faithandwhatever.com. Also, feel free to stop by faithandwhatever.com to check out our new blog where we post weekly. We will see you soon.